All right, welcome. So at this point, you should have a little bit of an idea what validation is all about and how to validate, not really how to validate or why we validate, and some of the approaches to validation in regards to existence, range, and data type. I brought up good old VB Auto Center again, okay, and to actually kind of show you our approach to validation and how to write this code to validate. If you recall, there's four sections, right? You should know this by now. There's four sections to the program. There's the declare your variables, and the second was get your inputs. What we're going to do now is expand that and then do calculations and then display. What we want to do is expand that get your inputs to now say get and validate your inputs, okay? So not only do we want to get our inputs, we want to validate them. In this case, we sit back and we look at what we're doing in VB Auto Center. As I mentioned in the previous video, again, we're using checkboxes and radio buttons to actually validate, the input. Validation is not required. If you check it or not, it is basically that all that apply, right? And so if you don't want a stereo, you don't want leather, you don't want navigation, you don't check those. When it comes to the radio buttons, on the other hand, you got to pick one of them. This is why I highly suggest that every time you use radio buttons, you actually put a default button and check it at that runtime or design time, meaning you go over to your properties and check one of those buttons, okay? This way you don't have to validate that they actually selected something. If your users tell you that, hey, I don't want you to have a default, I want them to physically go select one of them, then we would have to validate to ensure that they selected one of them, okay? And so, but in this case, what you want to do is minimize the amount of potential errors, so I like using a default for my radio buttons, all right? When it comes to text boxes, like I said here and here, okay? Our situation is a little bit different. It has to be freeform. You can't select something. You can't, there's different things you can do to make the numbers go up and down, but that gets obnoxious in a sense too. So what we want to be able to do is make sure allow people to enter stuff. But again, before we dive into we want to get and validate, before we take that data and we get it, we want to make sure it's good before we ever allow it to go off and do the calculations. Okay, once again, we're adding things to base price and so on as we go through it. So what we want to do here is we want to take, when we go get this input, we want to make sure of things. In this particular case, we want to make sure that it exists, meaning you give me a base price. We want to make sure that it's the right data type. In this case, it's a number, okay? It's numeric. And we also want to ensure that it meets a range. In this case, we're going to say the base price needs to be greater than 0. And so what we want to do is write a conditional set of logic that will allow for that and ask those questions, and based upon the answers to those questions, either give a message there's an error to our users coming back, and I'll show you how to do that, or allow it to move on. Does that make sense? All right, so let's look at how we kind of do this. And so in this case here, here's my button click. Here's where the difference is. Instead of just getting input, we're going to get and validate. And here is a nice set of code. This can be written a couple different ways. I sort of like this, and I highly recommend all you need to do is cut and paste this into your programs and modify it for what it is you're validating. But let's kind of look at what we're doing here. So what we're doing now here is that when we click the button, the very first thing it's going to do is check for data type. Not only is it checking for data type, it's also checking for existence. That's the cool part about how this works. We check for, is it numeric? So this is a function, it's an internal function, okay, intrinsic function to VB that will take this the value that's entered into the txt.text. It will take that value and determine if it's numeric. If it is numeric, okay, it will be return true. Thus, it'll be on the true side. If it's not numeric, it will go down to the else. So in this flow right here, it will say if it's numeric, whatever I put in here, so if my user puts $60,000, okay, 60,000, it is numeric, it will then take that base price, it'll take that content and move it to the variable. Notice what it's doing. It's moving it after it checks as numeric. Make sure you don't do this still. Don't move it beforehand. It doesn't make any sense because we put ABC in here, it's going to abnormally end. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to be better programmers, and we're going to, we're going to ensure that it's numeric before we ever move it to that DBL variable. This way, we will not throw an exception. If it's not numeric, it will go to the else, in which what we're going to do is do this thing called messagebox.show. This is literally an object. We don't get into objects too much, but it's an object and it's a little method.show that will actually display on the form that says base price must exist and must be numeric. We're going to take it, we're going to set the focus back to that text box. You guys know how to do focus now. And then what we're going to do here is exit the sub. Because as I said before, what we want to do is that if the data is bad, we want to bypass everything else. We don't want to do any of the calculations. What exit sub does, it bypasses it. I kind of went too far. Exit sub says exit the subroutine that we're in right now. In this case, the procedure we're in right now. It will go to end sub and bypass everything else. Okay? Let's watch this work. Okay, see if you get the ideas. So we'll go ahead and start this program. Okay, and here we go. Make this bigger. All right, and if I sit back and I put in bad information like this in, okay, before I had this validation, it would have abnormally ended the program. Now that I have that validation code in there right off the bat, it's going to give me this thing called a message box that says base price must exist and must be numeric. As you notice, it put the focus back on the base price to allow me to go ahead and enter a good price, okay? If I put bad data in for trade-in, it's going to tell me the same thing. Once I put good data in there, it will not bypass all the calculations. It will actually do them. Does that make sense? Okay? So how do we write this? Once again, I'm going to check to see if there's a base price. As a matter of fact, I'm going to take this out for 1 second. I'm going to check to see if this is a base price, okay? I'm sorry, I'm going to check if the base price is numeric, I should say, all right? If it is, I will then move it to my variable. We got to get to my variable for calculations, right? Because we're going to use it in calculations down here, but I only do that after we know it's there. Once again, isNumeric's doing two things. If I don't put something in there, it will actually throw this error still because null values or nothing is not a numeric, and so thus it's going to be both price and must exist and must be numeric. Okay, does that make sense? All right, cool. Once you basically have this, okay, you sit back and now you know, so the requirements are base price must be numeric, it must be a number, and it must exist. This is the code to actually write for it. The last thing we're looking at is a range, and to write a range, we basically add this piece of code here. You can do this in two different ways. You can do this first and add this afterwards, or you can make it a nested if, that if it's numeric, then I'm going to check the base price. Okay, that's how I did it here in my trade-in right there. I'll keep both of these examples here for you. Does that make sense? So in this case here, we basically say the base price. So if it meets all this criteria, didn't exit the sub, now I'm going to go down and check for range. And in this case, base price must be greater than 1 or 0 or whatever. Okay, whatever the requirements are. So if it's 0, whoops, if it's 0, what did I do there? I would basically put that in there. What did I do? There we are. I lost it here for a second. I can put that, whatever the requirements are. If it's a between thing where the base price has to be greater than 0, but we don't sell any cars greater than 100,000, I can very easily do this. I can say if it's this and if it's greater than 0 and, or in this case, less. Well, let's do this. Or this is an or situation, so right? So I could say if DBL price is less than 0, okay, or in this case I had less than 1, which is actually right. So 0 or less, or DBL base price. Whoops, DBL base price. There you go. Is greater than, we'll say 99,000 because we don't sell any cars over 100,000, and so we could basically do this. Okay. So 99, here we go, there we go, a comma blew it. So in this case, what it's going to do is check for the range. It says, if I enter any number over 100,000, I'm going to throw this error. Base price must be greater than 0 and less than 100,000. Okay? You can put anything in this message box.show. Notice the double quotes, notice the open bracket, okay? Notice the double quotes, and we're putting the string in there. And that's how we're doing this. Base price must be greater than or equal to. Whatever you want to say, it's up to you, okay? And as the error message. Be very, be specific, but don't get too long, right? But tell them what the error was and be pretty specific about it, okay? So let's try this real fast and let's see how this works. All right, so let's go back here. And once again, you can see that if I sit back and put bad data in, what would happen here is it's going to fall into ask if it's numeric first, right? And so because it's not numeric, it did this text box right here. It went to the else, and it says base price must exist and must be numeric. If I clear this out like this and hit enter, press submit, it's the same thing. It's not numeric, so it's going to fall down there. So it's testing existence, and it's also testing testing numeric. Okay. If I put a numeric in there, we'll make base price $10,000. Everything should work, and it goes all the way. Or trade in is not good, so let's go ahead and put 0 in for trade in, and everything works. Perfect. Okay. Let's clear this out. If I sit back and I put a -1 in here, all right, that's not a good number. You'll see now that it says base price must be greater than 0 and less than 100,000. It passed the existence and the numeric validation, but as you see, it did not pass the range validation. If I put in, let's go back here and put in 100,000, or what I put in there, 1,000,000, it should be the same thing. It's going to say it must be between those two. Okay? Again, requirements will tell you what the range should be if there is any validation for range. All right? So in this case here, I got to be between 1, so I'm going to sell a car for $50,000, and my trade-in won't have a trade-in, and then boom, everything works. Okay? Once again, note the exit sub. Okay, if it doesn't meet the criteria, it's going to throw this message box out there. As soon as the person says okay, it comes back and sets the focus and exit this procedure. It bypasses all this code and goes to here and puts the control back onto your GUI. So your user can now fix it. Does that make sense? All right, so again, you can write this a couple different ways. I don't need to be set on one way. You could have your existence and your data type in one if condition structure, and you could have as soon as it meets that, then go ahead and check for your range. Make sure once it's numeric, you move everything to the DBL price, meaning you move it to the variable. And then that's what you're checking down here range-wise. Notice how I'm using that. I don't use a text box anymore. Get rid of that text box. Start doing things with your variables. Another way of writing it is the exact same way as this, almost the exact same way, just a little bit different. I'm going to check for validate. I'm going to check for if its data type is correct, if it's numeric. If it is, I move it to my variable. Then I check for my range. Okay, it's the same thing, just a different way of writing it. Either way is fine. Whatever makes more sense to you. If this makes more sense, perfect. As I said before, what's kind of cool in this is that you can cut and paste this. So if your requirements are I need to test for data type and data type only, cut and paste this and modify your code with this, meaning modify what you're looking at, modify your variables that you're moving it to, and modify the message from your message box.show. All right, and then if you have a range to it, cut and paste this and add that to it. All right, so you can cut and paste that or cut and paste this. This program will be available to you with this video and also out under week 7. All right, cool. All right, I'm going to end this video. I'm going to come back though. I want to show you a few more things on validation in the next video, so part 2 of this.